Доброго дня.
Welcome. Welcome everybody who has joined us this morning. Ukrinform continues this series of important talks. Today's press conference is devoted to the issue of the expulsion of Russia from the Council of Europe and the decision taken by the relative authorities of regional governments of the Council of Europe. With us is Mr. Tarasyuk, the permanent representative of Ukraine to the Council of Europe, the member of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, and the out-of-staff judicial advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Mykola Ponatovsky. I would like our colleagues to join in by putting your questions through the chat in the Zoom platform. If we are ready, we will begin. I can't help telling that it is a month since Russia began the aggressive war against Ukraine when the first rockets hit the Ukrainian cities. It is now 30 days that Ukraine is blaming in the fire, but we are defending and protecting our land. The opponent has been demoralized by the high spirits and moral standards of the Ukrainian defenses. But I would like to go back to the diplomatic front, however. There are a lot of achievements here, and particularly, can we talk about this in terms of the expulsion of Russia from the Council of Europe that we saw this month? So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tarasyuk.
Борис Іванович, перепрошую, увімкніть, будь ласка, мікрофон.
Your microphone is not unmuted. Welcome everybody who listens to us, who watches this program. Indeed, we can only wonder and take pride in the deeds of our heroes in the front while defending this country against the Russian barbaric incursion and intrusion. It is also self-evident that we've got some achievements in the diplomatic front. Victories include the fact that the main speaker of our foreign policy is the president and the minister for foreign affairs, Mr. Kuleba. We can take pride in these victories. As for the decision by the Council of Europe to expel Russia from the Council of Europe, indeed, this is a historic decision for the Council of Europe itself. Here, Ukraine and our friends have gone a lot, have done a lot of efforts to achieve this. On the first day, the Cabinet of Ministers of the Council of Europe passed a decision to denounce the act of aggression. And the next day, the Council of Europe, its Cabinet of Ministers, passed a decision to suspend Russian membership in the major bodies, including Parliamentary Assembly, Cabinet of Ministers, the Congress, and other major bodies of the Council of Europe. That is to say, since the second day of war, Russia has been excluded from the activities of the major bodies. But this is a temporarily deed. But the principal thing was to pass a decision on the expulsion of Russian Federation. And that happened on the 16th of March after the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe passed a decision to look at the issue. And the next day, the Cabinet of Ministers passed that decision finally, effective of 16th of March this year. There are a couple of issues that remain to be resolved in terms of legal issues, financial issues. Yesterday, the Cabinet of Ministers finished its work on these issues, and by the consensus, we passed a decision on the legal and financial consequences of Russia being expelled from the Council of Europe, including the withdrawal of Russia from the European Convention on the Protection of Fundamental Rights, Human Rights, a fundamental document. And to implement this, the European Court of Human Rights was set up, a separate body that considers individual cases and cases of one state against the other state. And this is a unique European court. In other words, all these legal issues have been discussed, and the Council came to the conclusion that the Russian Federation is still responsible for all the decisions of the Council of Europe as of 16th of March 2022. The Russian flag has been taken away, all the plagues have been taken away. Russia is not participating in the activities of the Council of Europe. There are some partial agreements that can be accessed by other countries, non-member states, but this is a technical and judicial issues that will be decided upon very shortly. Thank you.
Перепрошую. Звичайно, політично це
Indeed, politically speaking, this is an important victory that the Russian flag has been taken down. But while we have expelled Russian Federation from the major human rights watchdog, does not that mean that the aggressor will become wild beast that will be free to act in the way it deems possible, including the nuclear option? How can we bring Russia to political responsibility? I would like to say that this decision by the Council of Europe that was passed unanimously by the Cabinet of Ministers and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, it meant the punishment of the country that breaches major documents of the Council of Europe, including human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. This is a unique act testifying to the fact that the Council of Europe has become unanimous. So far, it is a united body that has expelled a member state, Russia, for its act of aggression and its massive breaches of international law, of the war of aggression of choice. Will this unbind its hands? Has Russia ever felt that its hands were bound? Did they live up to their commitments in terms of human rights? In spite of the fact that Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe renewed its membership, they began implementing new legislations where Russia put herself in a situation where it was free to decide which decisions by the Council of Europe to live up to and which to ignore. That gives us a ground to believe and state that nothing has changed since the time when the Russia was a member state and now that it has been deprived of the membership. It has been breaching the international law, the main principles of the international law, the country that breaches major documents, either Budapest Memorandum or the Helsinki Act. It's a transgressor of international law. It continues the policy of the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany. Russia is behaving just like the Nazi invaders behaved in the Ukrainian territory during the Second World War and in other countries of the world. In general, why has this happened? The Russian political elite for centuries has been sick. And in this way, it um, sends its vibes to whole Russian society. Think of the percentage of the Russian population that are supporting this war. This testifies to the fact that the elite will be responsible for these crimes. And I think there is no one better to talk about the responsibility of Russia than Mykola Knatovsky. But before I conclude, I would like to say that uh, Russia is now waiving its nuclear option, and their representative at the United Nations said that if Europe behaves badly, he reminded us that Russia has nuclear weapons, saying that the Russian Federation is a barbaric state in the 21st century, threatening the world with a nuclear stick. Mr. Gnatovsky is out of staff legal advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Sir, how do you think Russia will be brought to justice for its criminal acts? Thank you and welcome everybody. Legal responsibility of Russia as a state is a real thing. As a real thing is the personal responsibility of the Russian elite for breaches of international law that has been breached and are going to be breached and are being breached. This mechanism is implemented through the mechanisms of international institutions that Mr. Tarasyuk has mentioned already. Russia is still a party to the European Rights Convention until the 16th of September this year, meaning the right to live or the banning of torturing and the inviolability, personal inviolability. This is where private persons can be brought to justice. And until the 16th of September, Russia collectively as a state can be brought to justice. And judicially, this country is liable for the demands to immediately stop attacks of the uh, peaceful population and non-military objects. In the same way, Russia will be responsible, according to the order by the International Court of Justice at the United Nations, where they are accused of genocide. And it is unequivocally asking Russia to stop immediately military action against Ukraine. This is a very important, a very serious breach of the United Nations Charter and is a basis for a maximally tough sanctions within United Nations and counteractions that will be taken on board by separate states depending on their will and possibility. As for the individual responsibility, we are talking about the International Criminal Court has begun the analysis of the military crimes done by the specific persons and by the Russian leadership. I hope that the International Criminal Court will be more effective and will be working in a timely manner, unlike the previous routine, because it has been quite slow in reviewing these cases. Given the fact that more than 40 countries, in terms of the Rome, under the Rome stages, asked this court to consider these cases. That's one thing. Another important thing for me is something that I've been working on for a couple of weeks at the request of the foreign minister to set up a special tribunal on Russia that will consider cases for individual responsibility of Putin and his lieutenants. We are now shaping a coalition of partners that support this idea. We are having consultations at the level of the foreign ministers, and we also are mounting public campaign that has already put together more than 1.5 million signatures. I believe this idea deserves to be fully implemented, and a relative decision, even if it will be uh, brought out of court, will mean that the aggressor will be brought to justice. We all are hopeful that such an institution will be set up and will live up to its commitments. I would like to ask the question that I will address to Ms. Svitlana, who is the member of the Rivne Regional Council and is the member of the regional and local authorities body at the Council of Europe. It was yesterday that the Council of Europe denounced Russia and supported Ukraine. We know the atrocities that Russia is committing in the Ukrainian territory against its infrastructure, civil population. We are lacking um, humanitarian corridors, and we are seeing humanitarian disaster. Of course, the local authorities are very efficient in defending our country. This decision by the Council of Europe about denouncing what of Russian aggression, what does this mean for Europe and for local authorities in Ukraine? Could you dwell on that, please? And immediate participation of the Ukrainian delegation while this issue was debated in the Congress. Welcome, dear colleagues. We, the representatives of the local authorities, have been forced to become diplomats. We have formed a female battalion. We have people coming here with their children. It took us 72 hours to get abroad. Of course, we could participate online, but strategically and operationally, we chose the right way to proceed because before voting for the declaration, we did a lot of things. We were working on some versions of the declaration. There was a word combination, armed conflict, and we insisted that this has been changed for the word the war. We've taken along such leaflets with the QR codes and captions. We have given those leaflets to the members of the Congress to familiarize themselves with real pictures, for them to know what's going on in reality in Ukraine. We appealed with a letter signed by the female members of the Ukrainian delegation at the Congress, for the whole Congress to know what's going on in Ukraine. We have now resorted to some female um, tactics, and we aired the air raid alarm that our citizens hear every day, and we switch this air raid alarm here within the walls of the palace. They were quite disturbed. We were giving interviews to the local press and media. We met a lot of delegations. And when it came down to voting on the declaration, it was important for us to make sure that unanimous support of the declaration has been effected. Even the governments that did not support sanctions against Russia and sometimes have taken a more loyal stance towards the Russian position, the local candidates either voted or, as we saw it, left the room, others abstained. This is a political document. And it is important that it spells down that the Congress condemns the Russia's actions in Ukraine condemns the fact that Russia illegally annexed Crimea and legalized the occupied regions in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. It also supported the internationally recognized Ukrainian borders. Every delegate and deputy of the Congress will make sure that this resolution is known in their local municipalities. We would like them and ask them to inform their governments on this decision. Apart from political issues, there are two important humanitarian documents. We have created two platforms. The Congress initiated the setup of the platform Stand Up Ukraine, where all the refugees in Europe will be able to find, which is free of charge, some dwelling, transportation, and this platform will be up and running in 10 days' time. We will make sure that we provide as much information as we can for those Ukrainians who are staying abroad. At the initiatives of the head of the counts of the chamber, we created a platform of the cities that are willing to help Ukrainian communities. Ukrainian communities will get registered on the platform where they will be able to find a partner specifying their needs. We are not only talking about the current needs of Ukraine during the time of hostilities. We are now thinking of what the Ukrainian needs will be after the war is over, when Ukraine gets down to renewing its infrastructure. Thank you. So it's not about decisions, as they say, from up to bottom, but rather setting up horizontal links and ties with our colleagues who will be helping Ukraine to come back to normal life after Ukraine is being renewed, and now they are will be providing help to Ukrainian refugees. We heard 959 speeches. It seems that it's a unique situation where so many people took part in these discussions. People wanted to share how they help Ukrainian refugees. But now what is important is to set up logistics for our cities to be able to express what our today's needs are and what Ukrainian cities and communities will need after the victory. We turn to a lot of countries. I will take an example, the country of Georgia. You know how the Georgian government responded to the Russian aggression. We met their delegation. And of course, we were kind of taken aback by their words, where they say, we cannot support sanctions against Russia because then our country will not survive. And I told them, we will prevail either with us or with you or without you, but you could lend a helping hand to Ukrainians' victory. And if Ukraine continues to have problems, that will mean that you will cease as a country to exist, because after us, in case we are overwhelmed, they will turn to Georgia. And I reminded them how during the 2008 war, Ukraine was standing by Georgia. Thank you. And by the way, as for the Russian position, Mr. Tarasyuk, at the debates at the parliamentary assembly, there were voices saying that Russia perhaps should not be expelled altogether. We should retain the mechanisms for Russia to come back, saying and implying that Russian people are now deprived of the protection of our organization. Russia is part of Europe, and it cannot be stripped altogether of the powers and it doesn't make sense to isolate and push away Russia. How would you assess such claims? With your permission, I would like to follow up on what Ms. Svitlana said, in particular, the aid and help to Ukrainian refugees at the joint initiative of the Secretariat of the Council of Europe and the Ukrainian permanent representation at the Council of Europe. We've launched a couple of international marathons under the title The Unity of Local Self-Government and the World for the Well-being of People and the World. We have seen two international marathons of this sort, and it was paid for by the USAID and the Council of Europe. And we've seen Ukrainian cities united online in cities like Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Kiev from Ukraine and other countries of the world, European countries represented there, cities from the South and North America, Israel. As of 29th of March, we will see the third round of this marathon. The main goal of this marathon is to open up the window for the local authorities in Ukraine on the one hand and other countries on the other hand to channel and specify the needs that Ukrainian cities and villages and settlements are experiencing today. It's an important initiative that works towards mobilizing the help to Ukraine from around the world. In particular, two marathons were joined by more than 300 foreign participants, meaning representatives of the local authorities, of the local government bodies, which is quite a resource for the Ukrainian cities and communities. As for the concerns regarding the Russian people, Russian civil society, I will tell you the following. I have not only surprised, but rather taken aback and indignant at what I heard when I heard those speeches at this body, a body that comprises 46 countries of Europe. When we talked about legal and financial consequences of the Russian expulsion, there were proposals like a cry for the Russian civil society. And of course, we had to provide an eye opener for something that is self evident for the Ukrainians, but is not self evident for the representatives of other European countries when they say that let's not forget the Russian people and the representatives of the Russian civil society. And my answer is, what kind of society you mean? A society where 74% are in support of the Russian barbaric aggression against Ukraine. Is it the people that you care about? Or rather, you care about a society that has been for 2 decades keeping a czar, Mr. Putin, and whether they are right or wrong, these people are voting for him. And sociological data tell us that he is a bandit, a criminal. And are we talking about care for these people, people that for decades and centuries has been engaged in expansions, plundering of other nations, and wars against other nations, a society that has effectively killed millions of Ukrainians during the artificial fa- famine in 2033. What has this society done to stop Putin? Yes, we've seen some lonely protests. Have they changed anything? Nothing. This is a society unable to change its gangster power. Ukrainians are different. We saw this in the revolution of 2014, an orange revolution, Ukrainians have shown their desire and will and ability to defend democracy. Have you seen anything like this of the so-called Russian people? Where are such actions? Where is the civil society of Russia? It's not there, it doesn't exist. That was my message, what's going on here in the walls of the Council of Europe.
Зрозуміло, дякую вам. Ну, дійсно, якщо так подивитися, то Україна
Indeed,
вже
if we
багато
stop to
років
think about it,
відповідно
Ukraine for many
завдає
years,
таким
and
втрутам,
especially today,
підтримує навалу
is
російських
a
агресорів, в тому числі і з
wall that
Європи.
holds back
Схоже, це
the
переоцінки і
Russian
зміщення
invasion,
Росії.
this
Європа
Russian
просто
horde.
посилює
And
свої
it seems that
оборонні безпеки,
Europe is
очікування
fortifying
і
its
стратегії,
defenses and
починає
develops new
зменшувати своє
strategies
озброєння.
and
Але
is
все
still
одно, якщо подивитися,
re-weaponizing
це можна так
its
подивитися, це
defense
порівняти,
capabilities.
знаєте,
We
як в
could,
наших сусідніх
even
країнах,
if
коли є
simplified, we can
дуже
compare
глибокий грабіж,
two
як це
flats
кажуть.
living
А в
next
другому
to each
сусіди
other. In one
стараються
flat, we
зі
have
своїх
bandits and
територій, але не
gangsters,
втручаються,
but
поки не зачепили
in the other
підступи.
flat, there's a man holding his
Тому все ж таки я
pistol
вважаю,
ready to
що
defend.
світ не
In your
повинен
opinion,
пропустити цю
can the
ситуацію і все
world
ж таки надати
take a
Україні
look
не лише
at what's going in Ukraine, reconsider its position, and
беззбройний
provide
захист,
Ukraine
але
with
несукорну
the
зброю, всю необхідну допомогу воєнну,
offensive
якою
weapons and
все ж таки
all the
прийняти рішення про
weaponry capabilities that we need, and at long last to provide the closed skies. Everybody has considered now and knows now that it's a civilizational war, war against not only Ukraine, but against human values. I will follow up on your analogies as whether a neighbor can feel safe once we have been attacked. No, the neighbor cannot feel safe. Today, we see NATO's concerns in fortifying the eastern flank and perhaps the defense of the NATO member states that are bordering Ukraine. And these concerns are not unsubstantiated. The sociology data that I quoted, and it was available at the Radio Free Europe, the data say that 51% of the Russian population support a possible aggression against the European country members. It's not a philosophical thinking. 51% of the Russian people are ready to attack the European Union members. This is a serious threat. It's a threat of a third world war, in the case of which the whole humanity can disappear. Do we have enough support? No, not enough. Let us be frank. The help and aid that we receive is not enough. They promised to us to provide fighters, to increase our air capabilities, to protect our skies. We were promised that we will get the anti-aircraft defenses and systems. They didn't deliver on that, which says that NATO as an institution is not able to provide for the peace and security on the European continent. Unlike the European Union, which has proven to be more effective and has turned out to be more effective in their help to Ukraine. As for the help, we can only be thankful for the immediate response and providing of all the defense weaponry from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from our neighboring countries. I'm not going to enlist all of them. And they are providing an effective help. But we cannot but be concerned by the stance, indifferent stance of some European countries towards the Ukrainian situation. They are following the principle of what they say is a typical Ukrainian position. I'm all right, Jack. It doesn't concern me. It's a threat of pan-European. This Russian bear threatens a bloody one, bloodthirsty, that wants to embrace and to cover on the world. They are dreaming of the status. Status is everything for them. Killings, bringing in damages, nothing. That doesn't mean to them anything. But the status is everything that matters. And this is a major threat for the whole of the world, of these gangsters of criminals who are now at the helm of the Russian state. That's why we need help. We need humanitarian aid because millions of civil population in Ukraine are suffering. We need military help. We need financial help to meet our needs in these difficult times. And after the victory, we will rebuild this country. And this country will take place among the democracies of the world where we naturally belong.
Дякую. Ну, будемо сподіватися, що
Thank you.
це станеться
Hopefully
скоро,
that this will
тому що як ви
happen as
сказали,
soon as possible. And I quote you,
відмітити,
this
а знаєте,
bloodthirsty bear,
українських усіх казках
in every Ukrainian
здолати
fairy tale, a
дії
bear
Росії
will, has
і
not been and will not be able
об'єднається
to oppose
проти
bees. And when the
цікавить
bees are
тільки
united,
позиція
they are a strong force and they are always have never been afraid
Я б хотіла
of the
хочу
bear.
поставити ще одне
With your
питання,
permission, I would
яке
like
хотілося
to
почути,
pose another
власне,
question that
приводу,
needs to
що
be
до нас
specified
є в ефірі Микола
because
Миколаєв.
we've got
Дивіться,
Mr.
була як
Gnatovsky available on the
склалася
air.
ситуація, коли
We know the
наші сили
situation when our
примусово
people
возять
have been
до Росії,
forced
коли
to go
такі
to
забирають
Russia.
паспорти
They've
або
been
якісь
deprived of
довідки,
their passports.
розселяють
Some
по
documents are
цілим
given to
Європі.
them,
Як
and they
Україна
are
і
settled in
як
some
Україна
depressive
виходить
regions.
потім з цих
Can and
ситуацій? Як
how
юридично
Ukraine
виходити з цієї
can
ситуації?
get
Ті
those
діти, які
people back
через з
when
Маріуполя,
children
наприклад,
and women from
переселилися
Mariupol, for
на
example,
територію Росії.
have been
Дякую.
forced to enter the Russian territory. Thank you. This is an example of an evident and blatant criminal crime. Deportation of the peaceful population at the times of hostilities, at the time of war, belongs to the so-called blatant breaches of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Those who are responsible for giving such orders will be brought to justice. And the International Criminal Court, according to the Article 8, has the responsibility to persecute them. Once the scale of this crime enhances, we'll be able to talk about the crimes against humanity, because we are talking about the attacks against civil population. As far as I know, sometimes such actions are covered by the right of the occupying authority to protect civil population from the consequences of the hostilities. As for the Mariupol, the occupying force is waging an aggressive war against Ukraine, and Mariupol is not under their full military control. So, in this sense, they have no right to claim such things. Secondly, if such evacuation is taking place due to some needs that otherwise people cannot be saved, otherwise, people must be evacuated within the territory of the state. And if people are taken to Donetsk region, then to Russia, it's a blatant breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Of course, you cannot and are not entitled to strip people away of their documents because it restricts their rights. And of course, their forced settlement without a prospect of coming back once the war is over does not meet the demands of the convention. It's part of the criminal crimes, military crimes. And of course, the Ukrainian General Prosecutor's Office is analyzing very seriously this situation, and the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court.
Дякую.
Thank you.
У нас є перспективи повернути цих людей? Як ви вважаєте?
Do you think we have a chance of getting those people back? Unconditionally, yes. The question is that their freedom of movement is restricted so far by the aggressor state. But at some point in time, this will be put an end to. We do have a chance of getting these people back. But again, I underline, otherwise we are talking about a criminal deportation. I'm sure that everybody will come back once, if and when we are able to bring the aggressor to justice. And I think it'll happen very shortly. I would like to thank Mr. Gnatovsky. It's such a pleasure to hear such a well-known and authoritative legal scholar. I would like to join in the discussion and ask Mr. Gnatovsky whether there are features of the genocide crime by the Russian barbaric machine and what the responsibility for such crime can be. I would also like to add to what has been said on the Council of Europe sitting. At that meeting, we heard the phrase, and I paid attention to that. They said Putin is unequivocally a criminal. His policy is criminal, and he is leading his country to starvation. But my point is that Putin cannot be identified with all the Russian people and with the military machine and policy that he has brought to Ukraine. Putin does not bomb personally Ukrainian cities, peaceful cities. He himself does not ruin our civil infrastructure. He does not shell and pummel our cities. He personally does not kill people, including children and women. He does not personally rape Ukrainian women in the occupied settlements. This is done by the so-called Russian people, represented by specific people who pull the trigger and bomb our cities, who pull the trigger at the civilians. These are the people they do it. But Putin and those who have been personally engaged in these crimes will be brought to justice and must be brought to justice. Mr. Gnatovsky, can I turn to you about the genocide issue? Thank you. Genocide always starts with the so-called genocidal attempt. It all begins always with these statements. The statements that we heard from Putin in a couple of his speeches and the texts signed by him, the pseudo-historical messages, they clearly point to this genocidal plan or intention. When we talk about the final resolution of the Ukrainian issue, what you think about the final solution of the Jewish issue that Hitler was talking about, the denial of the Ukrainian people to exist as a political nation and a right to exist in general, of course, are bad signs, but put together with the military actions against Ukrainians and massive and blatant crimes against humanity means that genocide is very on the table. Another concerning issue that Ukraine, for some reason, has been um, has been claimed to engage in genocide against the people of the Donbass. You see, what these people are doing always is to blame other people of the genocidal intents. So this is what we want to do, is to do away these lies about Ukraine. And all the countries of the world are obliged to prevent the measures of genocide. This is how the convention is called, the prevention of genocide and the criminal responsibility for the genocide. It was yesterday that we held a discussion with the leading Canadian international legal scholars and diplomats, and I believe they are right. This is an additional right for countries to ask for the cessation of hostilities by Russia. It, this war not only endangers the Ukrainian state, it endangers the existence of the Ukrainian people, of the Ukrainian nation. This is genocide. This genocide issue is very serious matter, and the International Court of Justice must consider this issue seriously. How can Russia be forced to comply with these decisions, including the International Criminal Court? You see how they behave in the at the United Nations, vetoing everything they don't like, and the uh, United Nations Security Council, and in their participation in other international institutions. If I am allowed, I will begin. I believe that Mr. Borys has also something to say. Legally, and I underline the word legally, there must be some resolved issues to oppose Russia. Ukraine is effecting its right to self-defense. Self-defense can be single and collective. So those countries that find that they're strong enough and they are responsible enough, not only to Ukraine, but to the international community, must help Ukraine with weaponry, or if such a decision is passed, with the military personnel. Every country has the right and is entitled to fight the aggressor shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. And as Mr. Tarasyuk has explained in detail, he mentioned how the international institutions can influence the member state that breaches and violates the rules and procedures. And of course, United Nations has something to learn from the Council of Europe. And if the Council of Europe, the way it looks today, that has been shaped in the wake of the Second World War, and it has its work has been blocked, it is not efficient, then the General Assembly of the United Nations, the session of extraordinary session of which on Ukraine is now taking place. There are other measures, economic sanctions, counter sanctions, countermeasures that countries can take and must enforce. So once there is a political will, resource, and if countries are bold enough, there are resources and there are actions that countries can engage in. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ignatovsky, for your exhaustive answer. I would like to say the following. Russia and the United Nations. Since I happened to participate at the approximately 2,000 sittings of the General Assembly as a member of the Ukrainian delegation, unlike the Council of Europe, where you have strictly identified mechanisms of the expulsion of member states, at the United Nations, we don't have such a practical possibility. Legal possibility is there, but in order to effect this, it means that the Security Council must agree. Now, we can hardly imagine that Russia will vote for its expulsion from the United Nations. Of course, such a decision will be vetoed. So this is a deadlock situation, but there is always a way out. I think it is high time to re uh, put a new lease of life into this international organization? What should be done to ruin the outdated mechanism of the permanent members of the Security Council? For decades, we've been discussing the issue of how the Security Council format must be changed. There are countries that unconditionally can pretend and have the right to be the members of the Security Council, militarily and politically. But the five permanent members, they are blocking any attempts to reform the United Nations organization. So the only way to reform the United Nations, to make it more effective, bring it in line with today's realities, is in calling a universal conference, as we did in San Francisco back in 1945, and pass a new statute of the organization, getting rid of the redundant things of the past and set up an organization that would be effective to those countries that are in breach of its charter. Of course, such a work needs a lot of time and effort that effort that has to do with the organizing of such conference. And to have such conference organized, you need the agreement of the major countries. Theoretically speaking, I think such a conference can take place, perhaps without the Russian participation. Then we will see the birth of a new organization guided by the principles that are in line with today's international law and commitments of the countries, and an organization that will provide for the mechanisms of punishing a country that breaches its rules. In today's stature and charter, it says that a member state that is part to the hostilities must not participate in the discussions concerning that country. I think I am talking about Article 27. Never has this article been applied to the aggressor state. And why? This is a big issue. And the answer is because there is no political will. Every permanent member of the Security Council thinks of their own security rather than the global international security. I'm sorry, I had to add up to what Mr. Uh, Gnatovsky had to say. Well, this is a very urgent issue. There doesn't seem to be other ways to stop Russia from the from its politics that it has degenerated into. The whole world is united in supporting Ukraine, and perhaps United Nations may take some time. But in today's world, we see the anti-Russian coalition. Russia has seen economic sanctions, but Ukraine is not lagging behind in her diplomatic efforts. Ukraine has done a lot over the last couple of months. For example, we applied for the European Union membership. And by the way, at the French Parliament, when he was addressing French Parliament yesterday, he mentioned that we are looking forward for such a historic event now that France is the president in the organization. It's very important. In your view, what will be the next steps? Can Ukraine become a fully fledged member of the European Union? And in general, the geopolitics, how is it going to develop? I believe that this is a historic decision to apply for the membership in the European Union. I remember the times when I was the Minister for Foreign Affairs at the leadership of the European Union. They felt awe and were they said that they felt that they uh, didn't expect Ukraine to join. And they told me even if Ukraine applies, the answer would be negative. And I welcome our decision, the decision by the president to apply. Brussels is seeing now three summits, the summit of the European Union, and the rumors have it, I have not been able to personally follow it, but it is alleged that the summit of the European Union has given a positive signal that our application will be positively viewed, which is not membership itself, but it's a good sign. The summit of NATO is also taking place. Let us see what the decisions will be. Of course, this decision will mean the future image of NATO in the future, whether the alliance can be viewed as a institution that can defend the future, the peaceful future of Europe, or they will sign the and accept that they are helpless. And of course, G7 will also be meeting in Brussels. These three summits will define the future of Europe, the future of peace and security. Of course, everything will depend on the political will. And something we don't see when we are talking about two major EU countries, the countries that will eventually decide whether Ukraine joins the European Union or does not. So far, these two countries have been blocking such a decision.
Ясно. Дуже дякую за відповіді.
Thank you
Колеги,
for your
час нашої
answers.
конференції
Dear
добігає
colleagues,
кінця, тому
we are
якщо може хтось
seem to be
хоче
running
щось
out of
додати від
time.
себе.
And if you have something to add to today's discussion, you are welcome. Perhaps Mr. Gnatovsky would like to say something. Once again, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you and answer your questions. As for the EU, I can only echo what Mr. Tarasyuk has said. It is an historic phase. And today, when I was talking to my European colleagues, it is self-evident that in all ways, morally, Ukraine is today's European leader. The EU, of course, combines a lot of judicial and technical issues. And of course, to access, it would mean a couple of years of rewriting legislation. Here, where the EU can become flexible and has to come up with a principled decision that will make our accession sooner rather than later, stating self-evident things that Ukraine is in the center of Europe, it's the center of Europe, providing for Europe to be able to assert its identity and ideals of democracy and human rights. This is my word that I would like to end with. But again, I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. Dear colleague, thank you for this meaningful discussion. Everything's going to be Ukraine. Svitlana, thank you very much for this initiative. Thank you.